Welcome back everyone to another video here by your boy Logic, and today we are going to be discussing the Total War Warhammer 2 factions in the multiplayer scene. Now this here is going to be for pitch battles, and it has no relation at all to what's going to happen for Warhammer 3 in the future. So in the past, about 3 months ago, I did do one here for the Silence and the Fury DLC, so do feel free to go check that out. But here I tried to predict what I was going to see in the future here, coming up to the end of Warhammer 2. So, without further ado, before we jump into this, the one thing I have to discuss is the parameters. So the first one here is this is going to follow the fruit rules. So in the multiplayer scene, we have two rules. We have the banner rules and the fruit rules. Now the banner rules hasn't seen any love in a short while, and it hasn't been updated here since we've seen the sort of come in here from the Silence and the Fury, but the banner rules has been updated pretty regularly. So that's why I'm going to be using those ones, and they predominantly go on a pick 2 ban none system. So the way that works is, let's say I pick the Dwarfs and the Greenskins, my opponent then counters with the Dark Elves, and then I have to decide between Greenskins and Dwarfs. Let's say I go with the Dwarfs, the matchup will be Dwarfs against the Dark Elves. That's roughly how that works, and that is kind of important, because there are other ones that we can do, for example, the pick 1 ban 2 system that was previously used, and that certainly changes how this looks here on this system. So the last element that's really important as well is the fact this is for the average player in Total War Warhammer. This is not going to be for the best or for new players, the average player here in the competitive scene. So please take all of this into consideration, and remember, this is also my opinion. Now you are, and do feel free to not agree with some of the things that I say. Do feel free to have a nice good discussion in the comments with me. I'd love to know your thoughts and opinions, but just remember, this is my thoughts and opinions. This year I've done about 3,500 hours in for casting, playing, all my live streams, everything. That includes single player as well, of course, but there's going to be a lot of hours I've done in 1 year here, so this is going to be all of my thoughts from everything that I've done, and yeah, let's crack on with this. So without further ado, we're going to start here with the Beastmen. Yeah, by far S tier. I think still, even with the changes in the fruit rules, which is going to be bringing Taurox and also the Doom Ball here into the SEM status, to kind of balance out the faction, they're still going to be the strongest faction in the game. I think by far they're really good for new players, they're good for the mid-tier, and very good for high players. I think they're just exceptionally good faction. Coming in with Tuskal Chariots as well there for the Silence and the Fury, exceptionally strong models. Also there with going on their casters with the Tuskal Chariots, yeah, very, very good indeed. I think Traitorkin updates and some of the magic changes here to the Wild Magic table is really, really good, and they're an extremely strong faction, very difficult to deal with indeed. So, we're going to move here on to Dwarfs, and I think Dwarfs have also seen a buff. So they had an FLC when the Silence and the Fury came out, and they got a beautiful man called Thoric Ironbrow. Now this guy changed the game here entirely for the Dwarfs. Now he came in and brought some stuff, and brought the love that Dwarfs really needed. So Dwarfs traditionally struggle with melee attack. They're very good on their melee defense and have really good armor, and they're very, very tanky indeed. And that's pretty much most of the reason why most people don't like them. But here, Thoric Ironbrow came into the scene with the Rune of Doom, which gives 24 melee attack faction-wide, so all of the units on the battlefield will get that plus 24 melee attack and fear. And then he also has other runes as well. So we have like the Rune of Speed, which gives 24 melee attack and speed bonuses. We also have a Rune of Slowness that can kind of help control the battlefield, and then a Rune of Wrath and Ruin that it's a really good explosion spell. And they're kind of the three that are going to dominate the multiplayer scene. And the man here coming in as well is going to be super tanky, a really good melee combatant that does armor piercing and magic damage, and was so good that it left the Rune Lord completely out of contention. You never see him, and I don't think you're ever going to see him again. So with that being said, I think Dwarfs really jump up some of the matchups they did struggle with. So for example, the Beastmen is certainly way more even than it ever used to be, and there's some others in here as well that it's just infinitely worse. Or for example, most of their weaknesses now have been bumped up a little bit, and now they're a little bit more durable. So, for the third faction, we are going to talk about the Wood Elves. Now, Wood Elves here have been S tier for a very, very long time. I think they're one of the true factions that just scales infinitely. As your micro gets better and your knowledge of the game gets better, you can continuously keep growing with this faction compared to other factions. This one could just keep growing and growing and growing because of their mobility status. They are the fastest faction in the game. They have incredible kiting tools, including poison, and most of their stuff that is exceptionally good is also really cheap. Dryads, incredibly strong. You've also got Glade Riders that are 94 speed, they're super cheap, and you can even still go 20 stacks and be incredibly competitive. I just think they're an exceptional faction that have very, very limited weaknesses. They can also challenge up against most of the top tier as well, which we will be going through when we finished and get all of these on here. But I just think they're exceptionally strong, and I think if you can have this arrow to your quiver, it really, really does help here in the multiplayer scene. So for the fourth faction, we are going to talk about Bretonnia. And I think Bretonnia is going to be B. I think Bretonnia certainly has dropped over time as more and more units are coming to the game, and Bretonnia have been getting less and less love. Yeah, they've been really struggling quite a bit. I think they've always traditionally done very well up against all the Elven factions, and considering they have a roughly similar playstyle where they have good range, skirmish, and overall decent builds, most players that play one normally play at least two, if not three, and Bretonnia is always a good one to have in the quiver as well, because it's a good counter here up against all the Elven factions. I think they also have quite a lot of weaknesses. So in the pick 2 system, they're quite difficult to cover for. They're going to have weaknesses here up against Skaven. I think also Vampire counts as kind of a weakness as well. I think it's 55% favourite to them. It can be a pretty rough matchup if you're not experienced in it. Lizardmen, another great strong faction that the Bretonians struggle with. I think Beastmen has certainly become harder for them. Chaos as well is certainly a strong one up against the Bretonians. I think there's just a lot of stuff you need to cover for, and it's really difficult. And Dwarfs as well, getting more powerful, that is a certainly big weakness you need to cover for. I think the two strongest ones are going to be the Dwarfs and the Lizardmen. It's really tough. So trying to protect them in the pick 2 is tough. So what normally most people do with Bretonnia, let's say you don't want to play against Dwarfs, you might go, okay, I'm going to pick Bretonnia, and then I'm also going to pick High Elves. So what High Elves would do, as they're a great counter here up against the Dwarfs, you're going to be finding people not picking Dwarfs because High Elves is on the table. So that's roughly how that works, but of course, there's only so many factions you can pick, and once you picked a faction, you can't repeat that pick, so it can be quite difficult to protect as a first pick here for the Bretonians. So moving through to the Greenskins. Greenskins are probably going to join here in the A tier. Of course, in the WWC, probably about 8 months ago now, so about last April, so maybe a little bit longer than that, 8-9 months ago here, we are going to be seeing that the Greenskins were by far the strongest faction in the game. They were having the title here of the Beastmen, and Beastmen were pretty far down. But yeah, for the Greenskins, extremely cheap skirmish cavalry is what they used to have, but then of course that got nerfed coming forward here in the Silence and the Fury DLC. There was changes to poison, and their skirmish cavalry went up by a considerable amount. And this here certainly changed the game for Greenskins. It was exceptionally easy to go for a wide, good competitive 20 stack with War that made them just almost impossible to delete in most of the multiplayer scene. In the top level competitive, what we ended up saying is, I'll pick Greenskins, and then you can pick Greenskins, and then we can play the match. We can then play our best of 3 or best of 5, whatever it may be, because Greenskins was pretty much just an auto win. And since then, they have fallen from grace. And there's going to be other factions that are certainly taken in the top tiers, but they're still exceptionally good. Grom is an amazing addition here as well. Coming in from the Warden and the Paunch, and also the River Troll Hag, a brilliant addition. Spirit Leech that has no negatives because you've got regeneration. Grom that is a massive and amazing chariot, like 90 charge bonus, great armor. Also has his Lucky Band and all his amazing immune to psychology buffs. And yeah, just Greenskins are super powerful with War when they go really wide, and they've got some just amazing tools in that faction that can do incredibly well. So I really like to see them in the A tier, but of course they do suffer to quite a few with Lizardmen and Vampire counts. And most of the factions that come with large entities that cause terror, Greenskins roughly struggle with. So then going to move on to Chaos, and I think Chaos here, without doubt, S tier. Chaos have probably the best selection of Legendary Lords in the game. You could pretty much pick all 4 of them, Konek probably being the weakest, but you could certainly bring him in certain matchups. He's not optimal, but he's still exceptionally good. He's just probably the Legendary Lord pick in an amazing selection. Arkan the Ever-Chosen, Sigvold, and then also Sarthoril the Everwatcher. God damn, those 3 are just absolutely incredible picks. Such a, they've got good skirmish cavalry. They've also got good infantry as well. Their mid-tier infantry is exceptional there with Chaos Warriors, and the Chaos Marauders also very good there as well. And they really don't struggle against too many. Dark Elves, Vampire counts are ones that really stick out to me as big problems. And you'd expect Wood Elves to be a huge problem here for the Chaos, but actually they've got enough skirmish cavalry they can kind of deal with and keep up with the Wood Elves. Yeah, they can take a lot of attrition damage, but they can actually challenge quite well. And Archeon can come in with Fireball and Burning Head, and give Dryads and things like that a really big problem. And I think actually Chaos is super strong. And Chaos now with the changes with Beastmen is actually a nice counter up against the Beastmen, which is quite nice to see, I must say. Yeah, I think Chaos is very, very good indeed. And when it comes to the pick 2 system, the only problem here is you can't really go the Beastmen and the Warriors of Chaos, just simply because you're going to be seeing Vampire counts picked there, or maybe the Vampire Pirates, and it can be quite difficult. But generally you'll be seeing Chaos picked a lot as a first pick, even as the very first pick. And it counters so many factions. It's going to be countering here up against Dowie, it's going to be countering up against the Bretonians, and it will do pretty well across most of this here. So if we go through here to the Tomb Kings, and Tomb Kings is a tough one. I gave them a bit of a rough ride before, and I think it was Ice Power that commented saying, yeah, that's a bit of a hot take. And I think at the time it was a bit of a hot take, and the more I played with them and the more I got to use them, I realised how many amazing tools they've got. I think I put them in the D tier before with Norsca, and I don't think so. I think they're at least C, if not B. I'm going to put them in C for now, and I'll consider it at the end, but I think Tomb Kings offer a really good counter. You know, for example, it really prevents first picks with Lizardmen and the Wood Elves, as of course Tomb Kings can do quite well into that. So it's quite a good counter pick faction. I don't think it's a particularly strong first pick. It really struggles up against heavy armor. So it struggles up against Chaos, it struggles here up against Dwarfs, and you know there's many other factions here that I really struggle to see it play against. Vampire Counts being another good selection choice. So I think here for the Tomb Kings, I think they are a strong faction. They haven't seen any love, of course, same as the Vampirates. They came in as a full faction DLC, and we haven't really seen any love for them. So there hasn't been really any updates. The only changes are going to be sort of balancing mechanics, and we did see a balance mechanic on their chariots, which are probably some of their strongest elements. They got nerfed from 4 down to 3, which is pretty tough to see there for a faction that really relies on them. So I think they're probably going to keep them in C. But they are super strong. You know, Ark of the Black is very good. Cetra is very good. I think they have some brilliant choices as well. I think they're a super fun faction to play, and they've definitely got some of the best mid-tier cavalry there with the Nekahara Horsemen. They are super strong indeed. Yeah, they are super strong. So we're going to go to the sad part of the game. By far the strongest here in the single-player scene, but by far one of the weakest here in the multiplayer scene. High Elves, the Assault, it's terrible to see Dwarfs up here and see the High Elves down here. It makes me very sad. Yeah, right. So let's get into it really though. So here for the High Elves, they also got nerfed on their chariots. They have, the only way to kind of feel like play High Elves is to kind of cheese it. And you've got to cheese it really hard. So up against other newer players that don't know how to deal with chariots, the triple chariot cheese blob was certainly the way to play. And it can still be pretty strong even against mid-tier players that don't know how to deal with heavily armoured chariots. And you can do the whole resistance stacking and buffing, and it makes them quite hard to deal, and they can even challenge up against SEMs. But now they've got nerfed here with the fruit rules. I definitely see you see High Elves down in D. You could have argued for them being in C with the chariot cheese blob, and you know they can go pretty strong Air Force, and you know here with Dragon Princes, and they could do some lovely stuff. And they're in a super fun faction, and they look insane on the eye. However, I think they're not very good. They get countered by a lot. They're not very strong, and yeah, it's tough. It's tough. It really is tough to see them down in D for such a good wide faction that have so many selections on Winds of Magic and etc. But the problem is they're just countered by too much. They're not very strong, and they're very, very expensive. They're very expensive for what they do, and the martial prowess is just not very good. Martial Mastery is okay, but even then, when you go below 50% of your health, you then lose all those bonuses, and you just become, you know, wet noodles fighting. So it's a tough one. It's a tough one. I think they're kind of passive for the faction. Their faction passive is not strong. So I think here, yeah, we're going to be seeing them. We're going to be seeing them suffer in D. So for the Dark Elves, this is a tough one. Dark Elves is a tough one. So Dark Elves is one of my factions for new players in mid-tier as a very strong one to start with. I don't think this translates to the top of the game, but I think they've probably got to be S tier. I think they're probably going to be maybe the last. There might be one more S tier, but I think Dark Elves has to be S tier. It has an extremely good report in my Shortbeard League, which pretty much goes from sort of mid-tier competitive players all the way down to brand new players. And Dark Elves is selected a lot and has a very good consistent win rate. So it's within 2 to 3%. It roughly sits at about 60 to 62% win rate here for the Dark Elves. And they're exceptionally strong, and I think they're pretty easy to learn. They're pretty forgiving as well, and Marathi is disgusting. Marathi is just beyond strong. And even then, you've got other strong choices in the faction as well. I think, yeah, you've got, you know, just your normal casters with the fire magic, with the Sorceress of Fire. I think also just having passives of death magic, but then also Malekith. Malekith is just incredibly strong as well. I think he's super tanky, and yeah, but Marathi by far jumps them up massively. I'm going to put them up on S. I think if this was for the top level of the game, you'd probably seeing Dark Elves drop to maybe A, but they're really good counter up against Chaos, really good counter up against Beastmen, and I've seen them trade pretty evenly into the Wood Elves, so I don't mind seeing them in the S tier. They can do okay into Dwarfs, depending on how good the Dwarf player is. I still think it's an even matchup between the two, maybe slightly Dwarf favoured, but yeah, it's pretty even there. And Greenskins, yeah, I think it's pretty Greenskin favoured. But either way, I think against most of the top tier factions, Dark Elves do exceptionally well. And if they don't trade evenly, they trade positively. So yeah, I think I can see them in the top doing quite nicely there. So Norsca, I think this goes without saying, Norsca probably is the weakest faction in the game right now, but it does have the least amount of love. By far. By far has the least amount of love. It came as a pre-DLC for Warhammer 2 and has seen nothing since. It doesn't have any legendary lords that do magic, or any sort of just normal casters as lords that do magic. So you're kind of left here with two choices, which is Throg, or you're going to be coming here with the Hunter of Champions. And that's pretty much it. It's going to be Hunter of Champions 99% of the time. I think Throg has some unique cases that he can do quite well, but otherwise here, Wolfric is going to be your selection choice. Now, he is exceptionally good, don't get me wrong. Seafang, very good. The Hunter of Champions, exceptionally strong. Fight or Die as well in that mixture to really help you punch through that front line. Very, very good as well. I think they are a strong faction. I think with the changes to Beastmen, with the SEMs, etc., and the rules changes, and also the changes here to Chariots, it certainly makes Norsca a lot stronger. It certainly does make Norsca a lot stronger, but even though this being said, with these two in the bottom, this is by far the best meta I've seen coming up to date. I still think Norsca has a good part in the multiplayer scene. It does really well into certain factions, and I still don't think they're left behind. I still think they're a very strong faction. So we're going to move into the Empire, and I think this is going to make a few people a little bit sad, but I think Empire B. Empire do really well into certain, like, they are the jack of all trades. They are the faction that has everything, but is amazing at nothing. But also, it's also terrible at nothing. You know, they have good tools for everything, and you know, they have some weaknesses here. I think they suffered the Vampire Counts. I think they also suffered the Dwarfs still. I think it's still quite a tough matchup for them. But they have some nice matchups as well. I think they do really well into the Lizardmen. I think they do well into the Vampire Pirates. And I think there's quite a few matchups that they do quite nice. So they also suffer to the Skaven, I think. I think Skaven can do quite nicely there. But I think overall, it's always been a good mid-tier faction. It's certainly one of the ones I would recommend for new players as a pretty quick faction to learn at a low level, not as a mid or high level. I think it's a very good quick faction to learn simply because handgunners are handgunners, halberds are halberds, swordsmen are swordsmen. It's pretty obvious what it all does, and it's pretty obvious how it all works. So it's a pretty good quick faction just to go, boom, quick, I'm in there, I've learned how this all works. So we're now going to move into the Vampire Counts, and this is a tough one. This is a really, really tough one. In the mid-tier level, I'm going to put it at B. Now, if we're talking about the higher level of the game, we're definitely putting it in A. You know, some of the players, you know, from the VM are very, very strong with the Vampire Counts, and they really show how powerful these things can be. The Vampire Counts are a very good faction indeed, but I think a lot of mid-tier players really suffer to get what is necessary out of the Vampire Counts. There are certain things and certain styles that you have to adopt to make them very, very strong indeed. Like, you really have to know the faction inside and out, and your game knowledge is crucial about how well you can play the Vampire Counts. Learning Winds of Magic is a big one. Winds of Magic is by far the best faction element of the Vampire Counts, and learning their mass amount of lords and legendary lords and being able to utilize those to the best of their abilities, knowing which one to bring when and why, and how to use them as well is super important. Learning how zombies and their place in the multiplayer scene and how they affect the matchup is really important. Graveguard, where to place them, how to play them. Dogs, Blood Knights. Blood Knights 1.7k, they're exceptional cavalry. If you take out Regiment rounds in the game, they're certainly some of the best cavalry in the game for sure. Especially when it comes to Invocation of the Healing, definitely the best healing faction in the game, I think, probably outside of High Elves. Yeah, very, very good indeed. And I think, you know, they're going to have a strong place in Warhammer 3 for sure, so it'll be interesting to see how they come forward. So, this is yet another sad one. Skaven in the WWC at the very, very beginning was uber strong. Uber strong. I'd even say probably even slightly stronger than Greenskins. I was saying probably I thought Greenskins was the strongest throughout, but Skaven was certainly focused on to begin with. Skaven has dropped massively. I don't want to say D tier, but part of me does want to say D tier, but they have an incredible amount of weaknesses. I think all of the Chaos factions, that's going to be Beastmen, that's going to be Norsca, that's also going to be the Warriors of Chaos, does very well here into Skaven. You're also going to be seeing Vampire Counts do very well into them. You're also going to be seeing Wood Elves as an absolute ban. It's really, really tough here. I think there's a lot of weaknesses that have come out here for the pick 2 ban none system for Skaven. They can do some good counter picking for sure. There's not many, but they can do quite well. Some I think counter picker to Dowie is quite nice, but even then I've seen Dowie players adopt and do quite well. But a good Skaven player will beat a Dowie player, and I think they're also quite nice into Bretonnia, and they do some nice other elements as well. But I think here for the most part, yeah, I think they really suffered a rush. I think if they have a similar playstyle in Warhammer 3, they could be extremely strong. I think they could be a very nice faction to play indeed. Very frustrating to play against for sure. But I think at the moment they've dropped down to C, and they have really, they are the one for me that has really fallen from grace, like really fallen far. And I think just everything else with it being updated, like for example, Chameleon Stalkers being a big change here for the Lizardmen, has really changed the matchup here up against the Skaven. So, Vampire Pirates. I'm going to be putting this in C tier. Vampire Pirates, yet again, since the WWC, their main play point was like how to counter Greenskins. So with most Greenskins, it was sort of ban Lizardmen, ban Vampire counts, and mostly it was either Tomb Kings or it was the Vampire Pirates that we used to counter. Vampire Pirates haven't really changed over time. It's double gunnery crabs, plus Noctilus coming in with the Lamprey's Revenge and then a bunch of infantry and some guns. That's pretty much how it's always been. There are different ways you can play it for sure, and I've seen some players play really well, but they struggle against high elf. Most of the elves, to be quite honest, they really struggle against. They struggle against Dowie, they struggle against the Vampire Counts, they struggle against Empire. I think also like there are other factions that can do really well, like Beastmen when they get some good surrounds, good fast factions. Also here, maybe even with Norsca can do quite nicely. I just think they really are suffering. But what they are good at, they are very, very good at. And good Vampire Pirate players, which there aren't very many, but when you do see a good Vampire Pirate player, they're very difficult to take down because not many people play them, so they're quite hard to play against because not many people get that much practice. So, yeah, I'm going to put them in C tier. They haven't seen any love, and, it's unfortunate. So, we're going to come to the Lizardmen, and I left this one to last on purpose. After a little bit of a discussion with some of the mods on my Discord, a lot of them believed that Lizardmen was A tier. So, I'll put it there for now. I think Lizardmen is S tier, and I'm going to go through this a little bit as to why, but I'm going to leave it in A tier. So, I think Lizardmen is S tier. Definitely at the top level of the game. I think with the addition of Chameleon Stalkers and a bunch of other elements as well that have certainly come into the game, Lizardmen are extremely strong. Matchups where they would have suffered up against Skaven and the Vampires, which is also why you're going to find them down here a little bit as well. Chameleon Stalkers fix that. I think they're exceptionally good. You can get really wide Stalkers, Javelins, you name it. They get in and they do the business. I think here for the Lizardmen, I'm not too sure why people think they've fallen from grace, but I think for the mid-tier, there's three different styles of play. You've got a big Dino Rush, where you're coming with a bunch of SEMs and you're trying to overwhelm, which is mass terror and being a nuisance. The other way of playing is sort of a counter-skirmish game. They are the best counter-skirmishing faction in the game, so if you're playing up against Wood Elves, you just try and make sure that they can't skirmish you to death. You come in with a bunch of Chameleon Skinks, and you come in here with the double solar engines. I think also the Arca Sote coming in the game is a super powerful one. It was so good that actually they've called it now a super weapon at 1,000 gold, which is maybe slightly absurd, but I think also, they are very strong. They are very strong for sure, which is why I kind of consider them, S tier, because of the Arca Sotek, and then also here with the Chameleon Stalkers, and they have a good wide faction pool of legendary lords and good items as well that are just super strong here. Oxyota was another nice element added, and he's really, really strong. So I really want to put Lizardmen in S, but the other three that I had a discussion with decided that no, we think they're A tier. I think for the mid tier, to some degree, I could agree with that idea, because the three styles of play they have, which some could agree Kite, which is not particularly strong, it's probably their weakest. You've got the counter skirmish, or mass infantry push, and then you've also got here with the sort of the big monster blob tactic, which you could see against the Vampire Counts. I think, A should be reasonable. I could definitely put them in S. I think they're S tier, but I'm going to put them in A because I think the majority of the public think that perhaps they are A tier. I'm not too sure why, but I think if this was a top level of the game, you'd definitely be finding them in S. So I think this here is going to be roughly my opinion, and with this being said, any one of these factions could go up or down at least one grade. So please take that into consideration. So for example, you might go, oh yeah, but high elves have to be in C. Just recognize that I think they could be in C or D, and with Tomb Kings they could be B or D. They could move up and down for sure. I think that this is on a pick 2 ban none system, and some of these they have to get nerfed quite a bit if they can't be first picked. So I think here this is probably where I'm roughly going to finish this off. I can't think of anything else to add, but do feel free to leave all your comments down below about your thoughts. I'd love to know your thoughts and opinions about where you would put things and why you would put things, and do respect other people's opinions. Don't just be rude about it. Of course, these are all of our own opinions here for the end of Warhammer 2. Now, there's going to be a lot of changes here for Warhammer 3, and this is going to be... Warhammer 3 is balanced here for domination. It's not going to be balanced here for pitch battles, which is what this is built for. So there's going to be a lot of changes here for balancing for every single faction going into Warhammer 3 there for the Mortal Empires. So I'm not going to touch that because I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how things are going to change, and I don't know how things are going to look for these factions. So this is going to be it. This is what I'm going to leave it off. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you did, please smash that like button. It really helps here on the channel. And of course, do leave a comment down below. Feel free to subscribe. We just hit 1,100 subscribers. So thank you so much for all of that amazing support. And also there, do check out the description. You can find all of my other social media platforms, including Twitch, but most importantly, that Discord. On that Discord, you can find all of my content like this one, all of my other replays. And on the 10th of February, I will be kicking off with Warhammer 3. So if you want to vote on what you want to see, go onto there should be a channel poll here on the YouTube. Go on there, go check that out, and make sure you vote for what you want to see, whether it's going to be videos, live streams, and then what content you want to see there on that as well. So other than that, take care of yourself. I've been your boy Logic, and I'll see you very soon.